Hi, everybody. This is Allison from AllyKatkreations. How are you? I'm hanging in. Hit that like button, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. We have a heat wave happening in New York. It's not that bad, but I am a little bit melting, but I'm not going to complain too much. Though I do have a really big infection in my face right here. That's why a lot of the recent videos I was slurring and not making out and pronouncing words. As you can see, it's even up into my eye. So I'm very swollen here. It doesn't hurt, thankfully, but it did impede and still does my speech. But that's not going to stop me from doing these readings. Oahspe. The Book of Divinity. So mind you, before I begin, if I mispronounce anything, it's not because I'm being disrespectful. I really just can't project certain words out of my mouth. You can see, I smile. No line. Line, no line. Yep, and I can't afford a dentist to get my tooth pulled. These fall out and I have to put them off to the side when I sleep. Not a pretty sight. I look like a meth head. Pretty depressing, to say the least. And I'm trying to pull and get whatever I can out naturally and holistically. But if I just disappear, either two things happen. I'm dead because the infection went to my brain, or I lost the internet. So I'm going to keep doing these until one of those two possibilities happen. And I'm not joking. Chapter 12. The next resurrection was 6,000 million souls, and God and his lords and his subgods had maintained the diva and maintained all the orders of heaven and the divisions and kingdoms, save what have confederated with Ahura and his kingdoms. And God and his lords had preserved their colleges, schools, factories, hospitals, and nurseries. And their standard in the temples were mortals. And of mortals who remained faithless, that is, the Ahun race, preserved in purity, God his lords and Ashars had commanded for the glory of Jehovah. But of the mongrels, who were multiplying fast on the earth, Ahura, his lords, and Ashars held command. But alas, for the great of Ahura's host in heaven, in less than 1,000 years, he had abolished his colleges and schools, save what pertained to acquiring a knowledge of the earth and atmosphere. He taught not his people to look higher for other worlds, and herein he began the work which was in after time to be his own downfall. Jove had said, whoever provideth not a philosophy for the endless acquisition of knowledge, dammeth up the running waters I had made. Suffer Ahura to teach what he will. The time will come when he will be obliged to find an outlet for my created beings. And rather than acknowledge me in my person, he will profess to send souls back into earth to be reincarnated. What happens to us? What's been happening to us? We keep cycling back in, all according to divine plan, which is wonderful. Ahura's heavenly kingdoms numbered more than 6,000 million souls, and half of them were little better than the Drudras. Being slaves to certain masters, doing whatsoever they were bidden, without knowing or desiring to know the reason therefor. As yet they were 600 years to pass before another dawn of Dan, in which God, his lords, and their people had faith that Jehovah's hosts would come from and on high to help deliver heaven and earth out of the darkness. On the other hand, Ahura, although having been taught the cycles in his early education, spread the word abroad to heaven and earth that there were no cycles, that as things are, had been, and would continue to be. So as much as God's host prophesied a coming light, Ahura and his host prophesied that nothing of the kind would happen. Ahura, moreover, sent the following order to his lords, to be taught in heaven and earth, to wit, I am not he who inspired Zarathustra, the all-pure? Spake I not to him face to face? Are not all created things my own? Who then knoweth that I will light up the world again? Behold, I am the personification of Orsman, who was Voidance, but now is me, Ahura Mazda. In me only is life and death and resurrection. Whosoever calleth Ahura Mazda is mine, and within my keeping. Suffer not thy judgment to be warped by prophets who hope for impossible things. In the 6th Dan and the 8th year, Ahura's heavenly kingdoms began to be disturbed by his sub-gods, lack of advancement, and so 60 of them congregated together and appealed to Ahura, saying, in reverence to thee, O thou all-highest God, many hundreds of years have we served thee, and we have paid thee tribute wherever thou requirest of us. We have helped to adorn thy capital, Seatusk. With diamonds and pearls we have laid thy streets. Thy mansions have we built with precious gems. And as to thy throne, what one of us is there but hath contributed to glorify it before thee? Yea, in all things have we been most loyal and tributary to thee, nor are we unmindful of our own wisdom. We remember thy arguments of old. Thou didst say to thy God, behold, thou hast long promised, we should be raised to more exalted kingdoms. But behold, 200 years have elapsed, and there is no advancement. This thou didst use as an argument for succeeding from thy God kingdoms. Behold, now we have served thee and thy kingdom more than 1,000 years. We come to thee to know wherein we can now serve thee, that thou mayest exalt us into the kingdoms commensurate with our wisdom and power. To this Ahura replied, saying, most humble and well-meaning lords and sub-gods, why come ye not before me face to face? Why have ye consorted in private? Was not my capital before thy throne the proper place for your argument? Had ye suggested any way whereby advancement was possible unto you, I had answered your demands. But his lords and sub-gods came not before him, but sent this answer, to wit, as thou promisest us advancement, provided we serve thee, so promise we our ashars and our marshals and captains. Now they come to us, saying, for hundreds of years we have served, give us preferment, but we have nothing to give. Think not, O God, that we are unwise, or that we hunger and come begging, or that addendums or gems or costly thrones would satisfy us. We know what thou hast to give, promises. We know every corner of the vast kingdom, and that all places are full, and that thou canst not exalt us. Wherefore then should we have spoken before the throne in Cetus? Would not our voices be bred mischief amongst thy other gods and lords? Rather let us err ourselves, than that we should endure thee and thy kingdoms. Hear us then, O Ahura Mazda. Whence the desire for endless advancement in this heaven be all? If a little knowledge given power, wherein is not great knowledge desirable? We have destroyed our great colleges, saying, higher than we, ye must not go. Remember thou, Ahura, we were students under the faithless gods and lords, when thou succeedest, and thou said unto us, behold the long training of your course, a curriculum of 1,000 years. Come with me, I will give you kingdoms at once. So we came to thee, and we were suddenly puffed up with great pride. Behold, now we look abroad, and the same stars shine upon us. We have not visited them. We know not how to go so far. The countless ethereal worlds lay beyond ours. We are told that there are habitable. We know not. We have no knowledge enabling us to get away from these heavens. Say, indeed, back to the filthy earth. To this Ahura replied, saying, it is plain to me, ye are beside yourselves. This heaven is good enough. If there be higher heavens, let them come or stay. I go not to them. But in truth, with your present convictions, I would be an unwise God not to grant you dismissal from my kingdoms. This ended the matter, and the 60 sub-gods then deliberated on their course, and finally sent to God in Moru the following address, to wit, in reverence to thee, God of the faithless and Jehovah, we had sub-kingdoms, and know our rank is beneath thine. But we are reaching out and onward. To thee we submit our cause. First then, there are 60 of us of the rank of sub-gods, and we hold 700 million subjects. Disaffection hath risen betwixt ourselves and Ahura Mazda, from whom we are alienated. But whether we shall unite our hosts in a new kingdom or our own, or affiliate with some mighty god, that is our question. What a preferment canst thou give unto us if we turn our subjects over to thee? God answered them, saying, brothers, hear me patiently and consider my words. First, then, I am not God of the faithless, nor of any other people, but God of the locality which was assigned to me by the Father through his Son. Your book. Neither can ye give your subjects unto me. For my service to Jehovah, I can have nothing, at least of all my brothers and sisters. Connection 2, the Oahspe book. In the next place, I can give you no preferment. I have nothing neither to give nor to sell, wherein the Father giveth me wisdom and power. I impart them unto others. Besides, until ye have also learned to know that ye have nothing, neither subjects nor jewels, also desiring nothing, save wisdom and strength to impart to others. How hope ye to gain admittance into my places of learning? And lastly, since ye have kingdoms of your own already, raise ye them up, and thus prove unto me your just merit. To this the confederated gods replied, what meanest thou? That gods and angels must labor for others than themselves forever and receive nothing thereof? God answered them, even so, save and except ye shall receive an abundance of happiness, and it will be endured forever. Here the matter ended for 2 whole years, and the sub-gods understood not the plan of Jehovah's kingdoms, but their kingdoms were out of sorts, having no head, and hundreds of thousands of their subjects were deserting them and returning down to the corporal earth, becoming wanderers and drujas. Finally, the sub-gods again appeared to God in Moru, inquiring a followeth, to wit, is not a god, whether he be for another or for himself? Behold, we have helped to build up Ahura. He is a mighty God. If we afflict with thee, we will labor to build thee up also. Yeah, we will adorn thy throne in thy great heavenly city. But since we have been sub-gods, we desire not to enter thy service as menials and servants. What then shall we do, that both thou and ourselves may have honor and glory? God answered them, saying, Ye cannot serve me. I have no servants. Serve ye Jehovah only. Behold, we are all brothers, being sons of the same great Spirit. As for building me up, sufficient is it for me that he who created me will build me up according to my just deserts. As for adorning my throne, ye can only bring substance to it from the lower kingdoms, which I desire not. Why will ye adorn the heavenly city of Meru? Behold, it is the best resting place on the great journey to the kingdoms of endless light. In a few hundred years at most, not only I, but my host will rise from the place to return not to it forever. And lastly, to be a self-god, as is Ahura, it is to own all things possible and hold on thereto. To be a god as I am is to own nothing and to retain nothing, but to be forever giving away all one receiveth. Said I not to your, sorry guys. Said I not to you before, begin with your own hosts and exalt them. Inasmuch as ye ask for subjects, behold, the Father gave unto you. Think not that he who will suffer ye now to cast them aside or barter them off, nor shall ye suffer them to become wanderers, nor to return back to the earth as drujas. As much as ye rise up to the kingdoms that he had entrusted to you, so will ye also be raised up. Nevertheless, if ye desire to affiliate with Jehovah's kingdoms, the way is open unto you. And your first labor would be to gather together all your own hosts and labor amongst them, teaching them wisdom, strength, and individuality, equal with yourselves. And when the lowest of them all is so risen, then can ye enter the kingdoms of the Father. As ye have had the profit of your subjects for hundreds of years, return ye now unto them service for service. Jehovah is just. The sub-gods made no answer to this for a while, but Jehovah moved upon their hearts, and they perceived wisdom and justice. And they repented, bitterly bewailing the loss of the 1,000 years in which they had espoused kingdoms. But they had neither power nor learning sufficient to extricate themselves, so they petitioned God for more light. Whereupon God affiliated them and appointed Vishnu Lord unto them and their hosts. And Vishnu took 300,000 teachers, captains, physicians, nurses, and laborers, and went to them in Maditras, a heavenly place to the west of Vindhu. And they established a lordly division with messengers in connection with Moru in Harati. And Vishnu sent his captains with sufficient forces under command of the sub-gods to arrest such as had become wandering spirits or had returned to the earth as drujas. And while as there were on this duty, Vishnu organized his kingdom, lorddom, and this was the first lorddom established in heaven, which is to say mortals on earth have military stations. So was the lorddom of Vishnu. Jehovah's voice had spoken to the god in Diva, saying, behold, the time is coming when the sub-kingdoms of Ahura, the false, will begin to revolt, and they have thousands of millions of slaves who will strive to go back to the earth to dwell with mortals. They will dwell in darkness, and thou shalt not suffer them to regain the earth, lest the races of men go down in darkness, even as before the submersion of Pan. For which reason thou shalt establish a lorddom, and raise a sufficient army to shield the inhabitants of the earth. and thou shalt make Vishnu Lord in my behalf. When it was known in Sitask, the heavenly place of Ahura, the 60 sub-gods with their hosts and affiliated with Jehovah's kingdom, general disobedience to Ahura was manifested by the remaining sub-gods, of whom they were yet more than 800, who had within their dominions upon upward of 2,000 million angels, all slaves, and with light of no other heavenly place than the small precinct where they had been kept in drudgery hundreds of years. The voice of Jehovah came to God, saying, My son, take advantage of the seed of disaffection in Ahura's kingdom. Send thou an Divan, a great power throughout the heavenly kingdoms, and thou shalt put trumpeters in the Divan, and they shall prophesy the dawn of Dan within 200 years. God perceived, and he had his workmen build an Divan of great power, and he provided trumpeters and sent them forth, saying to them, 10 years shall ye travel in heavenly places around about the whole earth, prophesying in less than 200 years Jehovah's Ethereal hosts are coming. Prepare ye for the resurrection. His kingdoms are open for the weary. His lords and gods will give you rest. Ahura summoned the council of false gods, hoping they might invent a remedy to counteract so great a prophecy. And he and his council sat 40 days and 40 nights in their heavenly capital, but there was no high light amongst them, merely each one giving his opinion. But at the end of 40 days, Ahura resolved upon the following method to send a prophecy of his own. Accordingly, he had an Divan built and sent trumpeters forth with these words, to wit, I, Ahura Mazda, only son of the all-nothing presence, personated in my very self, proclaimed from all my highest heavenly judgment seat. Hear my words, O God, all ye gods, and tremble. Hear me, O ye angels, and fall down. Hear me, O mortals, and bow down to my decrees. Behold, I sent my fire ship, prophesying that in less than 200 years I would come into a dawn of Dan. But ye obey not, ye were defiant before me. Then I swore an oath against all the world. Ye shall know my power. Then I came down out of my holy high heaven, and I am already come. Now is the dawn of Dan. I send my trumpeters first after them. Come to my lashers and enchanters, whose captain is Devious, whose god is Inra-Menunis. I will have mine, and I will give Druks and Drujas by thousands and tens of thousands over to the everlasting torments. Ahura's gods had come acquainted with him during the hundreds and hundreds of years, and they no longer trembled at his commandments. In their hearts, they knew he could not do what he professed. They knew his prophecies were vain boastings. Yet his very trumpeters believed not what they proclaimed. Crazy. Chapter 13. Jehovah prepares a way for the birth of Abram, Po, Brahma, and Iwata. In the 180th year preceding the dawn of Dan, there is to say 2,920 years after Fragapenti and Zarathustra, Jehovah sent messengers with 6,000 Ethereal Luas from the Nirvanian fields of Chen-Goratha in Etheria. And the swift messengers brought these words with them, to wit, Greeting to thee, God of the red star and her heavens, in the name of Jehovah, by the love and wisdom of Sempinta Armanji, Nirvanian goddess of Haratsati. We speak in the Father's name. Peace and joy be unto thee, O God, and to thy sub-gods and lords. And the Lord gods and goddesses, 180 years of darkness will now come upon thy kingdoms, and then the darkness will go away, and dawn will be in the place thereof. And in the time of darkness, behold, the nation of the earth will go down in the greatest darkness. But the light of the Father's presence will not be destroyed. A little seed shall endure amongst mortals, and that seed may propitious to the labor of thy goddesses, whom will come in the day she sendeth her with herewith 2,000 Ethereal Louis for Vinu, 2,000 for Jaeth, and 2,000 for Arabia. And the goddess decreeth that thou shalt appoint unto those Louis one of thy gods high rise, and he shall go with them, and his labor shall be with them. And the business of this thy God and of these my Louis shall be raised up heirs and followers who shall be grown to maturity when I come. For through these that they raise up will I deliver the fathers chosen out of the afflictions that will be upon them in that day. To this God replied in the name of Jehovah, greeting and love unto Center Armanji, goddess of heart. So Harot Satadi, I receive thy Louis with joy, and I appoint unto them my favored God, Yima, God of 1,000 years, tuition, namesake of Yima, son of Valvano, the sweet singer. So the swift messengers with due ceremonies left the 6,000 Ethereal Louis and then departed. And God sent messengers to Yima, commanding him to come to Moru at once, deputing his assistant god to take his place and to retain it until dawn. So Yima appeared presentingly before the throne of God, and the later instructed him in all that had been commanded and from on high. And Yima sent word to his former kingdom for 1,000 of his attendants, and they came also. Meanwhile, Yima conferred with the Louis, who explained to him all that they require. And after this, they provided a Pedmizah and descended to the earth, to Jaeth and Vinu in Arabia. And Yima stationed his Pedmizar midway betwixt the three countries in the first plateau above the clouds, and called the place Horde, in honor of the first heavenly kingdom on the earth. And when he had founded his place and named it, he sent word to God, Jehovah's Son, who gave him 500 messengers, mostly college students, and God gave them to return high currents so the Etherians could be supplied with the regime of their own order. Yima made the watches 24 hours, changing at dawn of sunrise every morning, hour on, half on and half off. And he called in all the Ashars from the regions of mortals, where he designed labor. And when they had assembled in horde, he thus addressed them, saying, Behold, it is yet 180 years till dawn of Dan, in the time of Sentra Armanji, goddess of Hatu Sati, situated in Nirvanian fields of Chen Gotha, will come in the Father's name and with wisdom and power. But until that time, alas, great darkness will be in heaven and earth, especially in these regions, and shall come to pass that the mongrels, the worshippers of Ahura Mazda, will triumph in these lands. They will build great cities and kingdoms, and they will rule over the Ihuns to great injury. But the Druks, Aborigines, will be redeemed to everlasting life during this period, where the mongrels will wed with them, and their progeny will be capable of receiving light, even immortality. But these mongrels will be great savages, nevertheless, and they will be cannibals over all these three great lands. And they that are slain in battle will be cut up and put in vessels with salt, and their flesh will be thus preserved for food. But because the Ihuans, the Zarathustrians, will not war, they will be enslaved by the mongrels, save such an escape to the forests. And betwixt celibacy and torments, the Zarathustrians will have great suffering and bondage, and many of them will be discouraged and lose faith in the Creator. But their seed may be preserved and delivered out of bondage. Ye shall raise up many who are capable of Suis, and in the time of dawn they shall be rescued from their enemies. Behold, here are present Etherian Lewis, who will go with you throughout these lands and survey the people and provide also for such great lights as shall lead the people. After Yima this instructed the Ashars in a general way, he handed them over to the Lewis, who divided them into companies of thousands, and each and every Lewis had one company of Ashars. And then this was completed, they departed out of Horeb, going to the several places. And in 11 days thereafter, behold, a Jahai being and began to fall on earth and heaven and earth. They felt a meteorus gave up its stones, and showers of them rained upon the earth, and the sun became as red ball of fire, and remained so for 166 years. And the peoples of Arabia and Vinu and Jaeth fell from holiness. The Zoroastrians gave up celibacy for hundreds of thousands and married, and begot children in great numbers, many women giving birth to 20, and some even to 25 children. And some men were the fathers of 70 children, and not a few even of 100. And the Zoroastrians, even the faithless, with the mark of circumcision, went and married with the mongrels, and they were with the Druks. And so the foundation of castes were broken up. So great was the power of Jahai, they even the Ihins often broke their vows and lived clandestinely with the world's people, begetting offspring in great numbers and not eligible to enter their sacred cities. And yet mortals saw not Jahai, saw their cities and temples, as it were, sinking in the ground, but they sank not if it was the Jahai falling and condensing it. Jehovah had said, what I give that groweth, the Kapoor, inspireth man to Kapoor. When I gave them growth, the S inspired man to S. And in the days of Ahai, never angels nor men can induce mortals with spiritual things. Only they that are organically grown in spirit can withstand. Chapter 14. Jehovah said, when Ahai cometh near a dawn of Dan, let my Lewis be swift in duty, far-seeing the graces of men, not only break up the old foundations of temples and cities in those days, but the foundations of the abuse of the caste of men. My voice is upon the races of men. Today I say, preserve ye the castle of men, marry ye thus and so, every one to their own line, for I perceive it is wisdom. Tomorrow I say, I will have no caste, for the races are becoming impoverished in blood. Marry here, marry there. And I give them Ahai, and their desires break all bonds, and I raise them up giants and strong-limbed. But in those days my Lewis shall fly swiftly and great power, that a seed may be preserved unto me and my kingdoms. I come not from one race alone, but unto all men. As my spirit created I, them all alive, so my hand over them to all eternity. And when the shower of Ajai is over and gone, I send my high-rise gods and goddesses to gather together my flocks, and to proclaim unto them a new might, wisdom, and power. And those that have been selected and preserved by my Lewis are the foundations of my new order. Ohara took advantage of the age of darkness to sow disbelief in Jehovah broadcast over earth and heaven, and to gather in his harvest for the glory of his own kingdom. And when war and murder and lust were thus reigning on earth, Ohara decreed to his lords, and they again to his Ashars, and they again to mortals, that all that was requiredeth of any man or woman was not celibacy, nor carrying the alms bowl, nor any sacrifice whatever, but by saying prayers to Ahuna Mazda, and to his lords, and to wish them hither with praise was all sufficient, that on the third day after death they would ascend and dwell in Ahura's paradise. Nevertheless, such was not truth, For Ahura's emissaries caught the newborn spirits and made slaves of them, commanding them to gather regime and substance for the glory of Ahura's heavenly kingdoms. In the 40th year before dawn, the voice of the Father came to God, saying, Meru is becoming uninhabitable. Harati shall be moved into the earthly, Zir-Edo shall be no more. Go not to Ahura with the prophecy, he hath denied my voice. He will not hear, but I will take the foundations of Sea-Tusk from under him, and it shall go down into the earth. But thou, O God, my son, I forewarn for thy kingdoms, and thy upright sons and daughters shall be preserved through the darkness. They shall become my brides and bridegrooms. I will prepare a place for them in great glory. Call together the diva, and I will speak before them, and my voice shall be proclaimed throughout all these heavens, save in the heavens of Ahura, where my voice shall not be proclaimed. So God called the diva, and they came and sat in the sacred circle, and the light, like a sun, gathered above God's head, saying, Come up above Harati. Behold, I have broken my meteorists. I have fashioned a new plateau in the firmament above, whereupon all things plentiful for heavenly kingdoms. Come hither with thy Lord gods and with thy lords of gods, and I will show thee. And when thou hast seen, thou shalt possess the place and begin its inhabitation, taking thither thy hosts of thousands and millions. When the light ceased speaking, it took wing and rose upward, and Div and Diva rose also the followed after. And thus Jehovah led them to a plateau, hence was called Kreshevi, signifying the light hath chosen. And God and his sub-gods possessed the place and laid the foundation for an habitation. And after that, he and his Lord and gods returned and counseled on the manner of removal. At the same time, there were 4,000 million faithists belonging to God's kingdoms, most wise and upright, full of purity and good works. But God and his lords and Lord gods had not sufficient power to remove so many angels, especially as many as them were yet below grade 50, and hence inclined downward more than upward. So after due counsel, God decreed to build an Alvanzila capable of 200,000 and to begin the highest grades. And God foresaw of his own wisdom that he should render unto Vishnu and his lordom an all sufficient force to protect the mortals of Vinu and Jayath and Arabia, which were soon to be flooded by the hosts of Ahura being cast down onto the earth. Accordingly, he sent for Vishnu, and when Vishnu was before the throne of God, the latter told him all the words Jehovah had said in regard to Ahura and his kingdoms, to be precipitated to the earth, and told him about the new plateau, Kreshevi, whether the light had conducted them. And he further commanded Vishnu to return again to his own place, Matralis, and survey the dominions and estimate what force he should require in order to protect the mortals of those three earth divisions. Vishnu replied, As to the later part of thy commandment, O God, I have already accomplished, for I feared these things might come to pass, and I provided accordingly. The number I will require of the above grade, 80, will be 600 million, for I must have at least one angel for each and every mortal. God answered him, saying, Thou shalt have 800 million. Whereupon Vishnu took leave and returned to his own place, Midatras. God immediately sent forth sectors with power, and they went into the colleges and factories and other places of Jehovah's kingdoms, and selected out 800 million angels required by Vishnu, and God sent them to Midatras as soon as possible. Of the 600 million angels taken to Midatras, who had been subjects to sub-gods, because of 100 million, they had strayed off, becoming wanderers and drudras. Vishnu found 30 million above grade 50, and these he appropriated at once to work in concert with the sub-gods in building schools colleges, factories, and all such required places for the elevation of man. When he had thus established order, he called together the sub-gods and said unto them, think not that I am about to leave you. I am not about to leave you, but ye are not mine to keep, nor are ye hosts of mine. Ye asked for them in the first place, and Jehovah gave them to you. I have restored order. The time is now come when one of you must be chief captain over all the rest, and he shall apportion you according to his highest light. Choose ye therefore your captain, and I will give him a judgment seat and badge of office, and ye together shall comprise a council. For I will make this a kingdom when the majority hath passed grade 50. The sub-gods deliberated for 8 days, but perceiving and responsibility of leadership, not one of them would accept the place. So they came before Vishnu, saying, we pray thee, release us, and raise thou up another person, and he shall be our captain. Vishnu said, a certain man and woman married, and they prayed Jehovah for offspring, and he answered their prayer, and they had many children. And now when they beheld they were responsible to the children, they said unto the Great Spirit, we pray thee, give the responsibility to some other persons. What think ye of them? Now I say unto you, Jehovah heard their first prayer, but not the second. If I serve Jehovah, how then shall I answer your prayers and appoint another person in your stead? It is a wise man that rusheth not into leadership and responsibility, but he is a good man, indeed, who have gotten in. Saith, now will I go ahead in Jehovah's wisdom and power with all my might. The gods who are above us come to such a man and help him. Go ye then once more into the council and appoint a chief captain. Hardly had Vishnu said this, then the sub-gods perceived what was meant by the higher light. And the whole 60 held their hands, saying, I will serve thee, O Jehovah. Give me whatsoever thou wilt. With that, Vishnu commanded them to appoint one with the highest grade. This they did, and fell upon Sudga. And according, Sudga was made captain of chief of Mitras, with rank 60 on the first list. So Vishnu created a judgment seat for Sudga, and gave him a badge of office. And the other sub-gods were made captains of the divisions and numbered according to their assignments. And none of them were humiliated before their former subjects, but became trainers and disciplinarians in new fields of labor. And their former subjects were no longer called subjects, but hosts. And they were liberated in all things, save with no liberty to return to mortals. Hardly had Vishnu these matters settled, when the host 800 million came as a guard and shield to mortals. These Vishnu organized, making Mitras the central throne over them. And he divided them into companies of 1 million, and gave to each company 1 marshal and 1,000 messengers. And the marshals again subdivided their hosts into thousands, and numbered them. And to each 1,000 he gave 1 master with his quota of messengers. Next, Vishnu divided 3 great countries, Vinu, Jayath, and Arabia, into as many parts as he had appointed marshals. And the lands were mapped out, cities and towns and country places. And each marshal was assigned his place. And there was made a record of these things, with the maps and divisions and the names of the marshals, masters, and it was registered in the libraries of heaven. So Vishnu hosts were sent to the place and commanded to give daily reports of their labors, which were carried by the messengers to Vishnu. Very interesting. Chapter 15. In Maru, God and his officers were using all their strength and wisdom to provide for the removal of his hosts in Krishevi. The demand for builders, surveyors, and carriers with power was so great that God determined to send trumpeters through the kingdoms of Ahura, the false, asking for volunteers. For this purpose, he sent 12 Optivans in different directions, some even going through the city of Cetus, Ahura's capital, and they proclaimed aloud what they wanted. And it came to pass that in less than 1 year, The Otvans gathered at Ahura's kingdom 7 million angels capable of grade 70 who are able to fill the places required. This was the most damaging blow of all to Ahura's kingdoms, for he thus lost the wisest and most powerful of his people. And this news went like fire before the wind. His sub-gods began to revolt against him, claiming their own kingdoms. Many of them openly preached in their heavenly places against him, accusing him of falsehood and being a mere pretender with little power. Nevertheless, he had great power in the name of Ahura Mazda, for he was believed in heaven to be the same God, even like Ahura Mazda, that inspired Zarathustra. And mortals also, living and dying in this belief, could not be convinced otherwise. And when their spirits left their mortal bodies, Ahura's angels took them to the heavenly city of Sitas, where they beheld its glory, shining and magnificent. And they took them in sight of Ahura's throne, but not near it. And they were obliged to crawl on their bellies a long distance, even for this purpose. And the throne was kept radiant with perpetual fire. Then they were made to recrawl their way back again until out of the city. After that, it was said unto them, behold, we have shown thee Ahura Mazda's heavenly city and the glory of his throne. Himself thou canst not behold till thou hast performed the service which is required of all souls entering heaven. Nor canst thou come again to the city most brilliant, majestic, till thou hast served under thy lords and masters that allotted time. After that thou shalt come here and dwell in the place and rest the happiness forever. And these spirits knew not otherwise, nor would they believe if told, and they thus willingly made slaves of themselves hundreds of years, carrying provender or during drudgery to certain masters who were again serving the lords and sub-gods, going through the same rites and ceremonies in heaven, and as they accustomed to on earth. But Jehovah provided for all things, wiser than the wisest gods. He created his creations with a door on every side, full of glory and freedom. Out of earth and atmosphere conjoined, he created animal and vegetable kingdoms. And he created the trees of the earth and the flesh of animals. Out of these two things, the dust of the earth and the air of heaven. With these possible created, he then, that in death, their corporeal elements should go to their respective places where they belong. But these possibility created the creator, that in the death of a vegetable and in the death of an animal, there, when the atmospherian part flieth upward, that it should carry with it a small possible part of the dust of the earth, and thus doeth his bidding. With this possibility created his creations, that the earth giveth away of its substance into atmosphere hundreds of years, and the fields became barren and produced not, and certain animals became barren and produced not, and their races go out of existence. And he created man subject to the same forces. And when the earth is in the giving off period, behold, man increases to desire the earth. And he cried out to his Father in heaven for the light of heaven. With this possibility created the creator the earth and the heavens above the earth, a time for the earth to give off its substance, the which flieth upward hundreds of years, and a time for the earth to receive from the atmosphere surcharge from the regions far away, addiction of substance for hundreds of years. And when it was thus receiving, it was called the time of Jahai, because the which falleth condenseth to Jai. When Ajai cometh upon the earth, the Drujas come also. The days of the darkness of earth are their delight. Their harvest is in the rich falling Ajai, and suiteth their laziness and their inclination to bask about. They become in those days like an overfed animal, and their masters, the false gods, they become worthless, for they derive their substance without labor. Ajai is their delight, but they also, like a foolish man drinking wine with delight, who continueth till his delight turneth to madness. So the Judras feast and disobey their masters, and then they become boisterous and unruly, full of disorder and evil intent, defiant, believing themselves to be gods and goddesses, like a beggar with a pocket full of money, who lacketh discipline and determineth to glut his passions to fill. So it was the Judras in the time of Jahai. Thus Ahura counted without Jehovah in his heart. He had conceived great power in his kingdom, but the long Agi told upon his heavenly places seriously. His sub-gods no longer paid him tribute to support in ease and glory his 5 million heralds, his 5 million musicians, his 5 million ceremony paraders, giving and providing for them constantly new costumes and new palaces and new decorations. So first one and then another, his sub-gods revolted, and Ahura was powerless to enforce obedience. For so dense was Agi, that whomsoever Ahura sent forth only revealed in sumptuous feastings. And it came to pass that in years after Jahai set in, over 600 Ahura's sub-gods had dissolved all connection with him, and 200 yet remaining were situated close to Tusk, Ahura's heavenly place. Not 10 of them could be relied upon in emergency. At this time, Ahura resolved upon regaining his lost dominions, and it was like a man having lost heavenly the games, resolving to win or lose all. Accordingly, Ahura set his workmen to build parade ships. 50,000 he said unto his remaining sub-gods, Behold, I will traverse the heavens in such magnificent glory that all angels and mortals shall fall down and worship me. And surely, too, this time of Jahai must come to an end. And in the day I will remember those that have been faithful unto me. And I will also remember with a curse those who have been unfaithful to me. For 14 years the workmen were building Ahura's fleet, and yet they had built but 30,000 ships. For so great was the desertion of his skilled men that failure met him on all sides. But with this, the 30,000 ships Ahura determined to travel throughout all atmosphere heavens. Accordingly, he called together his heralds, 5 million, his musicians, 5 million, his masters of ceremonies, 5 million, his masters of rites, 5 million, his marshals, 10 million, his captains, 20 million, his generals, 3 million, his lords, 1 million, and his sub-gods, 150, with their attendants, 20 million, his bearers of trophies, 10 million, and his light makers, 10 million, his waterers, 10 million, his torchbearers, 5 million, his bodyguards, 30 million. Besides these, there were the bearers of banners, the proclaimers, the road makers, the surveyors, the directors, and so on, more than 50 million, and yet the traveling hosts, 100 million, and waiters for them, 100 million. In all, there were upward of 400 million spirits that went within the 30,000 ships, and the ships were not full. And the ships traveled in the form of a pyramid, but not touching one another, and yet fastened together. And the base of the pyramid was 400 miles wide, every way, and 400 miles high. And the belt of light around about the pyramid was 1,000 miles in diameter every way. And it was blasted to run within 50 miles of the earth's surface. Thus set out Ahura for a whole year's cruise in atmosphere, and where he went, he proclaimed himself thus Ahura Mazda, the Creator, the only begotten Son of the Unknowable. Behold, I come, I the Creator. I have come to judge heaven and earth. Whoever is for me, I will raise up to nirvana. Whoever is against me, I will cast into hell. The period reflected light in its travel, and Ahura's emissaries on earth used this as testimony that all things were about to come to an end, that the earth be cast out in heaven and hell to be filled up with spirits, each to its place according to its obedience or disobedience to Ahura Mazda. On the other hand, Ahura's revolt sub-gods laughed at him, and as for the overfed and debauched Judras, they mocked at him. So it came to pass that when Ahura visited his revolted sub-gods in their kingdoms, instead of regaining their allegiance, he was sent on his way with hissing and groaning. And yet never since the earth and her heavens were, had there been such a great show and pageantry. Before Ahura had visited half the kingdoms in Atmospheria, he foresaw the brutality of his project, the probable downfall of his own mighty kingdoms began to break in his own heart. Enthusiasm for his name was on the wane, and all his magnificence had failed to restore him to what he had been. Now, while he was absent from Situs, the capital of his kingdoms, he had deputed Brahvawaga to reign in his stead and to maintain the order and glory of his throne. Brahvaatiwaga was a deserter from God's Helene, colony of Harati, where he had been educated 200 years and was expert in primary surveys and buildings, but impatient for advancement beyond his capacity. He had now been with Ahura 300 years, learning little, but feasting and frolicking, being a great flatterer of Ahura and given to long speeches and flowery words. While Brahvawaga was on the throne, and after the departure of Ahura on his excursion, there came to him one Oahspe, a deserter from Holistini in Zirdo, and he had been in Ahura's service 150 years, but banished from his heavenly place by Ahura on account of gluttony and drunkenness. Since wild time he had been a wandering spirit, dwelling sometimes in one kingdom and then in another, and often visit the earth and gaining access to the oracles, even to mortal priests, where he had represented himself, sometimes as Ahura Mazda, sometimes as God, sometimes as a favorite lord, sometimes as Fragapeti, and Thor, and Osiris, and in fact any name he chose, issuing decrees and commandments to mortals, then flying away to return no more. Oahspe came to Fragapata, and he said unto him, Greetings to thee, O God, in the name of Ahura Mazda. Behold, I sent to thee in great haste in our creator Ahura, who commandeth thy presence in the province of Vetashga, where he is holding a mighty council with Ahura's re-afflicted sub-gods. What preferment Ahura Mazda had fashioned for thee, I know not. To this Brahvawaga answered as followed, to wit, Who art thou, and from what kingdom? And above all, why art thou come without heralds in attendance? To this Oahspe answered, saying, Behold, knowest thou not me? I am Haran, god of Sutuyutha. Sorry, guys, again. I'm not pronouncing words properly. Just not doing it. Who else could come so quickly? Who else but I runneth fearlessly unattended betwixt the kingdom of the gods? Brahvaatiwaga had been drunk many days and was so dazed with the pretentious Oahspe that he took for granted that he was indeed Haran, a great friend of Ahura. Brahvawaga called the council together and appointed Siemens to be God in his stead, and so Brahvawaga departed in an arrow ship with messengers for Vetskwa, while lies in entirely different direction to where Ahura was traveling. Semes, the deputized god of Situs, was faithful to his office for 4 days, and then proclaimed recreation until the trumpet called from the throne. And in the interval, the debauched Oahspe obtained access to the floor of the inner chamber and seduced Semes to accompany him, carrying off the costly gems and jewels of the throne. And when without the capital, they embarked with their plunder to an arrow ship to some unknown region. For many days, the members of the council waited for the trumpet call, but not hearing it, resolved to learn the cause. And after diligent search, not finding Semes, but discovering that the throne had been plundered of its valuables, they had thrown into great confusion. Into 2 days after this, the throne was destroyed. The council divided and gone, and the heavenly city of Situs turned to riot and plunder. And there were in Situs near about upward of 4,000 million angels with no God, no leader, nor any herd whatsoever. Thus it came to pass that Jehovah took the throne from Ahura, and as it has been prophesied. And whilst this was going on, Ahura was away with his pyramid fleet, being discomfited wherever he went. But in 212 days after his departure on his journey, messengers came to him and told him what happened at Tusk. Ahura gave orders to set sail at once for his capital, which was done, and his pyramid fleet hastened with all possible power. Suffice it, in a few days he was back in Tusk, a witness to the rioting and plundering going on. But the majesty and the splendor of his fleet quieted the people and restored order for the time being. Nevertheless, he was without a throne and without a council. And I'm going to leave it there, guys. I hope you enjoyed this part of the Book of Divinity. Next time, we'll go into chapter 16. It's a lot of reading, and I got to rest my face. Sending each and every one of you love and light. I hope you enjoyed. Today is World Goth Day. That's why I look ridiculous, but I don't give a fuck. And hopefully this goes down and all can be restored. So I'm asking for prayers and anything you can do to help me, that would be great. Sending each and every one of you love and light, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye, guys.